As I said to you last week, my name is Joe Reggin. I am what is called in my denomination, which is Presbyterian, an interim specialist. What that means is that all I do is interim ministry. I travel around the country and work with congregations that are experiencing a change in pastoral leadership, especially for congregations that are in a particular state of crisis or trauma, or if they have conflict. I don't particularly see that you folks have any conflict, but I think it could be reasonable to assume that after your founding pastor of 40 years has left, you might be in some state of trauma. I'm not sure how high or how low. The last church I worked with was a congregation in Martinsville, Virginia. If you don't know where Martinsville is, and so many don't know where it is, it's 40 miles just north of Greensboro. And I went there because their pastor of 10 years, 2 weeks before Christmas of 2011, died on a tennis court one afternoon, very suddenly. So as you can imagine, that created a good bit of trauma for the congregation. And what might be called crisis also. Interim ministry is, as we do it now, is a relatively new feature. In the early 90s, the paradigm for interim ministry changed. Up until the 90s, basically interim pastors were usually retired pastors who would come in and create what was called a holding environment. And what that meant is that everything just stayed the same. Nothing was changed. No one talked about much. And every question that was asked was answered with this formulaic response. Well, when your new pastor gets here, you'll make that decision. Church began to realize that in doing that, what usually happened in situations, well, like yours, where there'd been a long-term pastor, is that pastors were called and installed and moved across the country in the Presbyterian system, and they got all settled in for about 18 months, and then they were asked to leave. So they became what's called an unintentional interim. And that's because in the interim period, the congregations, up until, as I say, the early 90s, had not really thought about the future, about where they wanted to go, what they wanted to do, what things they needed to do differently, what traditions they needed to keep and maintain. They had not reflected on their past and on what it meant to them for their former pastor to have left and taken a new job, or in some cases, what does it mean if the pastor that we love so much dies? What does that mean about God's grace, about God's love for us? Or in your case, if a pastor retires and keeps going on in the journey, what does that mean for us now that our pastor is gone? And the things that were really stable for us and that we knew and were kind of certain, well, maybe we're not so certain anymore. And then you get into the aspect of, if we're going to think about the future and where we want to go as a congregation and as a church family, then what kind of skills are we going to need in this new person? Do we need a person who is a great preacher? Do we need someone who is really gifted in liturgics and will write liturgy for us? Do we need someone who is a Christian educator, who can work with our Sunday school program and our adult education program, help us choose curriculum, maybe even write curriculum for us? Do we need someone who is a good administrator? Do we need someone who has the ability to manage a large staff? Those kinds of questions are important to answer if you're going to discern God's call to you of a new pastor. I come to be your interim. And I want to be really careful about how you hear me say what I'm getting ready to say, because I will function as a pastor when you need me to. If you have a need, if you need me to come and visit you in your home, if you need me or would like for me to come visit you in the hospital, just let me know. Give me a call, shoot me an email, send me a text. You should have all my contact information. If you want to talk to me, you don't need to go through the church office. Just call me. You've got my cell phone number. It'll change in a few weeks. I'm going to get a local exchange so you don't have to make a long distance call if you're calling from a landline. But when I change that number, I'll make sure everybody here has it. It'll be in the bulletin, the newsletter, and that kind of thing. So if you need me, please call me. The focus of my work with you, however, is to be your interim. That means I'm going to be spending a lot of time with your leadership or with what's called a transition team. And it'll be up to the leadership to make the decision about how they want to do this. Usually in Presbyterian churches, I work with the equivalent of your council, and they become a transition team. And I like that model. I've used it most of my career as an interim. And my career as an interim goes all the way back to my being a seminary student, by the way. I haven't done interim ministry for 30-something years, but I have done it for an aggregate of about 13 or 14 years, I think it is. And this will be my, oh gee, I counted this up the other day for the presbytery report. I think it's my 12th or 13th interim. And it'll be my 10th consecutive interim over the last, is that right? Well, 8 or 9, I think. This is number 10 over the last about 10 years plus. So where was I heading with the, oh yes, my functioning here. I'll be working primarily with your leadership and with the transition team, if that's the same group, then great, to deal with 5 primary issues. And I always write these down because I can never remember them. Your history is the first thing that you'll deal with as a congregation. And this is kind of neat, I understand you're having a 40th anniversary celebration?
Just happened.
We did it.
Oh, it's already been done. So how many years are you now? 40. Okay. I noticed the banner outside, remembering the past or planning for the future or something like that. It's a good slogan. I like it. So we'll be remembering together your history and be dealing with the reality of the loss of Pastor Bohannon. We'll talk about him almost as if he's dead on some occasions, but we'll try to get beyond that. And all remember that he's simply retired. He has not gone away permanently. But putting his ministry in a context and talking about the things that were done in the past are really important. In some sense, I think in a very real sense, it's partly about grieving over Pastor Bohannon being gone. And everybody here is going to grieve. For some people, it will take a couple of minutes. For some people, it will take a couple of years. And I would suspect, as with most cases of grief, for some people, they're never going to get over Pastor Bohannon not being here. It's never going to be the same for them ever again. And so we want to give everybody a little time to get used to what's new. And this device has irritated me yet again. Come on. Hello. Well, there we go. Thank you. Now, you're also going to be talking about a new identity. What does it mean to be St. Matthew's Lutheran Church after 40 years with the same pastor when that pastor is no longer here? What is your identity now? You'll be, I think I'm about to get into some of that inappropriate stuff you were talking We're going to talk about leadership changes and dealing with leadership changes and how those changes take place and how do you decide about that. I'm really margined on not talking about what congregations want in a new pastor. And that might surprise you until you hear me say what I would rather talk about is how do we discern God's calling to us, both in terms of what is God calling us to do as St. Matthew's Lutheran Church, what direction is God calling us to follow? What new things is God calling us to look at? What programs do we need to review and evaluate and think about maybe in a new way? Do we think God is calling us to grow St. Matthew's Church, to expand it, to bring in half again or twice as many members as you have now? Do we think God is calling us perhaps to start a new church here in the community? A second or third or maybe even a fourth Lutheran church. Maybe kind of down that way, you know, for all those heathens down in Manassas who might want to do something. I have no idea what that is. But I don't think, for me personally, it's really appropriate for people to say, well, I want this, that, or the other thing in a pastor. Rather, I think it's more appropriate for us as followers of Jesus Christ to say, well, as I've been thinking about this and praying about this, I think God is calling us to go in this direction. And if we think that's true, then we're going to need a pastor who can do these things. So I'm going to talk to you a great deal, I hope, about discerning God's will. Not so much about what do you want. In that context, we're also going to be looking at theological issues, thinking together about what does it mean to be Lutheran? What does it mean to be a congregation of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America? Did I get that right? Mm-hmm. Yes. And how much of that identity do we want to recognize? How much do we need to reconnect ourselves with the bishop and the bishop's office, if at all? And where are we in terms of that identity as being a member congregation of the ELCA? And then finally, kind of in the, and please be clear that these are not steps in a process that we can check off, okay, we've done history, okay, we've reconnected with the denomination, all right, we've figured out how we're going to change our leadership. But these issues that are very kind of monumental at this point, will whittle them down a little bit, so to speak, metaphorically. And you'll continue to work on many of them, quite frankly, even after your new pastor arrives. You'll be finishing some things up, getting ready to do some new things, getting ready to implement some things that have been decided. And that comes in terms of implementation of a new program. That's kind of the last step. But again, in saying that, it makes it sound kind of linear. And it's not. This is not at all linear. We do some grief work, we do a little work on history, do a little work on leadership changes, go back and do a little more grief work. It's like any other human process emotionally. And this is an emotional process. Trust me on this one. There'll be a lot of emotions that come out here. From anger, frustration, hurt. And that's just about what I said at the sermon last week. When you get into other stuff, it gets even more emotional. So I don't want you to think that we can say, well, it's going to be 6 months, we're going to be done, we'll have a new pastor. I don't know how long it's going to be for you. I will tell you that the typical interim takes somewhere between 18 and 24 months. That's just how long it takes. Now, standing here today, when I say 18 to 24 months, in my experience, most people go, oh, for goodness sakes, no, that's too long. My experience also is that at the end of 18 or 24 months, everyone typically will say, this went by so quickly. I can't imagine that it's been 18 months. Some of you will say to me at the end of my time here, I can't believe you have to leave so soon. Others of you will be saying, I can't believe you stayed so long. So we'll just wait and see how that works out. But there is a bit of work to do, and preparing for someone new is going to take you some time. You've got stuff that has happened to deal with. You've got stuff that is going to happen that you need to plan for. And just rethinking who we are together is going to be a task for you. And my task is to walk with you for a period of time, from my point of view, a relatively short period of time, to function as the pastor, but more importantly, as I said, as the interim, to work with your leadership, to work with those of you who are in leadership positions, and to work with your pastoral staff, to administrate the sacraments to you, to make sure the Word of God is preached and proclaimed, and that this is a place where God is worshipped and the community is celebrated, and there is equal amounts of joy and reflection, and probably a few tears and a little sadness thrown in on top of it all. It's going to be, I think, generally speaking, like most any other thing we do as human beings. There'll be times to laugh and times to cry and times to be angry and frustrated. That's the general rundown, real quick like a bunny. I wanted to make sure that any questions you had a chance to ask them, and maybe I can help you or maybe even answer them. Do you have any questions about what's going to be going on the next few months? Yes, ma'am. God bless you for starting. It always takes somebody to start.
Leave it to Tina.
Yeah. You mentioned obviously that you'll be working with the leadership. How can the quote-unquote non-leadership be part of the process and voice their concerns and all that during that process?
My experience has been that congregations never are shy about voicing their concerns.
Okay.
But more specifically, Tina, is that right?
Yeah.
Tina? Okay to call you Tina?
Yeah.
Okay. The leadership will set up through the flocks times to get together. We'll have, so that I can come in and others can come in and talk to you. And you can share what you're thinking, what you're praying about, and what you're seeing, and what your vision is for. And then we'll have other gatherings of the congregation. And we'll do that all through this time. And one of the things you might find that gets forged out of that is some new lines of communication will get built. One of the things that I think is always true about interim ministry is that congregations have a tendency to say, well, we have really good communication. And then in interim ministry, people start going, well, I don't know what's going on. And I thought we had good communication. So usually there's more communication built during an interim period, really than most any other time. So I do this ministry because I think it's critical to the life, the health, and the vitality of congregations and to the Church of Christ as a whole. If an interim ministry is done well, if people really do this work, then they can transition into a new leader fairly seamlessly without a great deal of trauma. If you don't do the work, it can be really problematic. I worked with a church in Fulton, Missouri a few years ago. Their pastor nominating committee has been meeting for almost 2 years. And I will preface what I'm getting ready to say by saying this congregation just dug in their heels and said, no, we ain't going to do this. Their pastor had been there 46 years. He intentionally became the longest tenured pastor there. He put off his retirement for 1.5 years so he could be the longest tenured pastor. And then they brought him back to be an interim, which was a gigantic mistake. When I talk to the Presbytery executive in Missouri, the equivalent of your bishop, executives hate it when I say that, but it's true. Mm-hmm. I was told, you're probably not going to get anywhere. We just need you to be here for 1 year or so, just so that they can form a pastor's nominating committee, is what it's called in our system. But this little group is continuing to work out the conflicts in a microcosm of the macrocosm of the congregation. They've broken off into little family groups. You've got internal stuff going on in families in this congregation that are being played out on the stage also. There's all kinds of interesting stuff going on. But the bottom line is they've been, I think they're getting ready to hit 2 years this month. And they're no closer to calling pastor now than they were at the beginning. So that's a little, horror story for you. That's supposed to scare you into cooperating. Oh, no. Yes, sir.
Paul.
Paul.
And follows on what Tina said. I think that this congregation has a history of lots of folks being involved and developing leadership amongst lots and lots of folks, and that's been a very positive thing for us. My hope is that as we go through and talk about those 5 things that you've identified, that we will get a chance to do that both in this groups like flocks and whatever, where we get an opportunity to vocalize the things that are on our mind, but at some point, hopefully, an opportunity through some kind of a survey instrument where people get a chance to maybe think very deeply about some of these things that have gone over time and express it in words on paper that can be shared with everybody at some point, because sometimes just off the top of your head kind of a comment may not really get to the depth of some of the feelings that things have. So if we can maybe consider that as one of the instruments that we use along the way, I think that'd be very helpful. We do have some expertise in the congregation who can help us in that regard, and that would be nice. But, or it could come from outside; it makes no difference. But I think having that as an opportunity for folks to do a little bit of more careful consideration of what they think and feel would be helpful.
Yeah. I appreciate you saying that, because it allows me to say in response, if I may, that if that's your tradition here, then that's probably the way this will go. It's very important for me that you folks hear me say this yet again. I'm not here to change anything. Not one single thing. Now, that doesn't mean I won't recommend some changes. It doesn't mean that as I observe what's going on and look at things, I won't say to your council, my advice to you would be to do X, Y, or Z. Now, whether they do that or not is up to them. And what I think is really important about interims that people need to really think about is I, as an interim, have no need to have you change. In the best possible sense of the expression, why would I care? I'm not going to be here. So if I don't like that you have a hymn somewhere in the worship service, who cares? Part of it is, for me, is getting used to a whole wide range of things in the worship, and this has been really interesting and fun. And I'll get to you in just a second. But it's not up to you folks to accommodate me in any way. And I don't need you to change for me, because I'm going to be here a short time and I'll be somewhere else and it'll be a different thing all over again. So my role is not really as a change agent, but as one who comes in to talk to you folks about how you want to do the change that has happened. And I think all of us, I hope all of us could agree at this point that whether we like change or don't like change or whatever, however we're responding to this emotionally, change has happened. Pastor Bohannon is gone. And there you go. So it would be important for me as an interim to make sure that if you have this expertise in your congregation, that if your typical style is to get together and talk in flocks, and then have a time where people can write things out and come back and share those with a little more depth, I mean, I think that's a great way to do it. But if that's the way you tended to do it in the past, then almost absolutely you'll probably do it again. Am I making sense?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry? Yes. Oh, yes. Oh, God bless you. Yes, ma'am.
I would just like to share something personal. You guys know I just came back from Indiana where my husband's sister's husband died and my
questions or concerns? Yes, ma'am. Hi.
Hi, I'm Melanie. You're coming to this church and you're in the different ministries. Are you going to be insinuating yourself into the youth ministry as well?
I'm not sure about insinuating myself.
Sorry.
I get to have some fun too. As I understand it, Brandon is the youth,
Yes.
the associate for youth ministry. He seems reasonably competent. So the answer to your question would be, let me say a little bit about me. I don't like redundancy and I don't like waste, particularly not of God's resources. And his time, my time, and Taria's time, those are all resources given to this congregation of which y'all are stewards. Now I hope to meet, let me see, I think next week or the week after I'm going to come down and meet the senior highs, and then either the week before or the week after, it's the week after I guess, I'm going to meet the junior highs. But do I have a need to come in and take over? No. You know, I hope to hang out with you guys a little bit, get to know you some, have a good time a little bit, because senior highs are always fun. But God agrees. But no, I'm not going to be messing with you.
I have more of a technical question as far as the call process. Tony,
Yes.
those who are part of that call committee, those are the ones who are going to make decisions how we go about calling a new minister, correct?
Yes, sir.
So suggestions that are made by the congregation, Paul made a suggestion, T's made some suggestions. Those suggestions are then voiced to the call committee, correct? Is that part of the process?
That can be, yes.
That can be?
Well, we have a constitution that lays that out.
Yeah.
Right,
Yes.
but I'm not as familiar with the constitutions maybe as the rest of the leadership is,
Yes.
because I'm not part of the leadership, so I just need to understand that process.
Oh, yeah, you are.
The way I understand this from talking to Brandon and several others is that at some point, the bishop and I will talk and the decision will be made in conjunction with your leadership here in the council that it's time to elect the call committee. And that election happens through the council. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, the council will elect those folks. And it will be their job to process the information that the congregation has given to them in whatever way they do that. And working with the bishop will send them a small number, in my framework, a small number of candidates. They will look over those candidates, maybe interview some, and if they find a pastor, that's awesome. If not, they go back to the bishop and say, we didn't want to date any of these people. Certainly didn't want to get married to any of them. So we need some more names. And that will continue until a candidate is found, that the committee discerns God is calling to this place. They will come back and announce that to the council and to you as the congregation. I assume they will introduce this person to you before this person ever comes here. Is that right? You know, that you will have some idea of who this is. And that the congregation votes to call the pastor. So that they don't do this behind closed doors, you know, and you wait for white smoke to come out of the chimney or something, and they say, we have the pastor. They come out and talk to you about, this is, as I understand it, this is the person that we focused on. This is the person we're recommending to you. We recommend you call this person, and you have time to talk, and they have time to share with you their process of discernment and why they think this person is the person that should be here as the pastor. So, in the Presbyterian system, we do it a little differently. The church I just left 2 weeks ago, when their pastor nominating committee was elected, they got all of their paperwork taken care of, and within 2 weeks, they had 50 some odd resumes. Over the course of the next 6 or 7 months, they will probably read about 130 to 150 resumes. And they will do all of the filtering out. So you folks don't have as Herculean a task as the Presbyterians do, in some sense. I mean, it's the same, you just don't have as much stuff to filter through. So God bless you for being Lutherans. Yes?
Could you speak a little bit about the role of our associate pastors during this process?
It's my hope that the session, there you go. The council will sit down with pastoral staff and just chat about job descriptions and function and how are we doing this. Brandon and I have talked a little bit about this. Taria and I saw not so much. She's been on vacation and, a lot of transition. But generally, to answer your question, I don't see a great deal of reason why your associate staff needs to really do anything much differently. And if you do, please talk to folks on the council or come see me or something. Again, I don't need to change your staff to accommodate me because I ain't going to be here that long.
I don't know if you've heard of it, but I've heard that one of the reasons why Pastor Dehan was here for so long is that this community tends to be very transitional.
Yeah.
A lot of military people that move in and out. There's a core group that's around. It's been around for a long time. For a large extent, this church turns around quite a bit. New members come in, people leave, and one of the reasons they wanted somebody here that long, because the church changes so much, so it wasn't really necessary.
Yeah.
Is that true? Is that true? Number one. And then for these people that get called, are they typically people that are looking for the transitional state, or someone coming out of seminary, or is it they call someone who is in a sort of a long-term relation with the church, and the church feels that they need to move?
I could not imagine a situation where the pastor of this church, that the bishop's office would give you the name of a candidate to be the pastor of this church who didn't have at least 15 or so years of experience. For you to get a candidate out of seminary, I think would be bizarrely unusual. And if you got that person, you might really want to look at them because they might be really hot property. I don't know. But
We already got that guy.
Is that him?
Yeah.
I just can't imagine that you would be given a candidate for this position that would not have substantive experience behind it. In terms of who you would get, what is their situation? These would be pastors who, within your synod or maybe from a different synod, have indicated to their bishop that they want to make a move. And there are all kinds of reasons for wanting to make a move. As a pastor, I've been doing this a little over 30 years. And sometimes you make a move just because you need to make a move. I'm getting kind of set in my ways here, and I want to go do something with another group. It is my understanding in talking to some folks on the bishop's staff and a couple of other Lutherans in the surrounding area, Lutheran pastors, that your synod has a tendency to have long-term pastors in it, that there's not a lot of movement around. I would see that as probably a pretty good sign. It means that pastors and congregations tend to get along well and everything's going fairly positive. Nobody's looking to move much. But as I understand how your process works and just generally how things go in churches, you're not going to have a pastor who's somewhere happy and they don't want to go, and the bishop says, all right, well, you've got to go over to St. Matthew's now. I don't think that happens in your system. Did that answer your question?
The bishop calls you on Wednesday and says, Sunday you're over.
Yes. Now, that's true unless you're in a really large church that is a major contributor to the conference. Then there's a little more room for negotiation.
Although
If you
we
see how.
had some guys in this community who were really, the staunch guy in
Yes.
a big congregation.
Yeah.
And
Well, yeah.
Wednesday they got a call and Sunday they were gone.
Yeah, and that can happen in the Methodist system. Yes, indeed. It can happen in the Presbyterian system sometimes too. There was a pastor in a church in North Carolina, rural North Carolina, who got an envelope in his mailbox one afternoon that had a little piece of tar in it and some chicken feathers. And it said on the note, if you're not in town by midnight, you'll be wearing these when you leave. So they were in conflict. So we had to do a little intervention with that congregation. Yes, sir.
My name is Dave, but
Dave.
Doug, to your question, Bishop Graham came to council before with Pastor Joe's name and so on, but he mentioned that where we, and Joe said, when the call committee is there and we've done the polling and however we're going to do it so that the congregation has a direction, as you said, then that'll go back to the synod, and there's 3 places basically that names of pastors come. And one is from the synod, that they know of pastors, as Joe said, that are looking to move or whatever. From people in the congregation that have visited other congregations or come and know of somebody that might be a good pastor, and they would submit those names, so we would all have a chance to do that. And then pastors out and about who want the change, and they'll just submit their resumes. They'll have heard of our church and so on. That'll all, the way I understood it, would go to the synod, and then from the bishop's office, they would give us, and he said 6 names, and then the call committee would look at that, and if there's somebody there, then we'd invite them to come preach, and so the whole congregation gets that and so on. But different places, but as Joe said, absolutely not somebody right out of seminary. That Bishop Graham said, no, not here. So, and we do have that kind of seminary.
Any other questions or concerns or problems? I'm sorry. I'm sorry? Who's going to be the pastor? We don't know yet. It'll take a little while to figure it out.
In the meantime, we have programs and we have things that we do and we have direction that we've been going. These are things that
We're going to keep
I see
riding
no
back here at
reason
St.
why we
Matthew's
not
Lutheran
continuing
Church.
to do
That's
these
right.
sorts of things.
We're just going to keep on going.
And so, we're continuing to truck.
Absolutely.
And like they say, the train is moving.
Now, if you're like most congregations, you will see a little dip in your attendance during the interim period. My charge to you in that respect is to go find your friends and neighbors and say to them, no, you're not allowed to skip out just because we have a substitute teacher. You have to come. So I'm going to put that obligation on you. Yes, ma'am.
Barbara Livey. If the congregation chooses one of the existing pastors we have, then do we start again with the same process to replace that person?
I don't know, because I don't know your constitution. In the Presbyterian Church, that cannot happen. An associate cannot become the pastor of the church. Brandon?
Yes.
Is that possible in the Lutheran system?
For one of the associates.
For the associate to become the pastor?
It's possible but rare. It's not an impossibility.
Yes.
But in those instances, Pastor Tari and I, to be specific, we have calls to the congregation.
Yes.
So you have called us in a role which is associate pastor. A call to be senior pastor is a different call. And so to do that, and to call, when you call a senior pastor, you will get names.
So you're saying that you would have to resign?
My understanding is essentially that is the case.
Yes.
Okay.
If I've understood what you said, and taking off other traditions, typically associates have to be gone for a period of time before they can be considered as at the level of being called as the pastor. Yeah.
But I don't know that that's necessarily the case, but yeah, we at least.
So who wants to fire Brandon? Give me just a second. Did that
Yes.
answer? Are you okay?
Yeah.
All right.
I don't know if this is a question.
Thank you, Brandon.
Excuse me. I don't know if this is a question or a comment, but someone came to me to ask if something, an event could be held. And we've all been on committees, and we've probably all been on council of one way or another. And we know that when someone has something to suggest, the calendars come out. Because this is a very busy congregation. Every entity in the congregation serves the respect of all. And so we don't like to schedule things on top of one another to impact them negatively. But, you know, it's sort of a head cut off. I didn't know where to go, what the chain of command was. This was a couple weeks ago. And I was advised, because of the particular event that was proposed, to go to Taria, because she was associated with the committee that normally would have initiated that activity.
Makes sense.
And I don't know, to me that was extremely helpful, because, you know, we're used to, you know, that kind of order within the congregation in terms of the things we do, and I think it maximizes the number of things that we can do and the effectiveness of what we do. But it was helpful to know, to go to the associate pastor that was associated with that particular ministry. Does that make sense to you?
That makes great sense.
Really ought to
I mean, as
proceed?
Brandon was saying, the two associate pastors here have specific calls because of their gifts and skills and interests. So if somebody is doing something in that particular area of interest, and this is again where the interim ministry can be really useful to the congregation, because sometimes congregations forget after a while why we did call this person. And the interim period is a great time to go back and look at those original calls and those job descriptions and say, oh, this is, you know, sure. And my response to what you're saying generally, and please pass the word to everybody in the congregation, I cannot be offended. Okay? You go talk to whoever you want to. You don't need to come to me. I mean, I'm glad for you to come talk to me. For the next probably 3 months, my general response is going to be, I don't know. Because I don't right now. And neither will your new pastor. And, you know, that's something that I'm here so you can practice on me how to get all this stuff done.
Yeah, well, I wasn't meaning to be offensive.
You were not, in any way.
Nor am I offended. I was just trying to, I guess, articulate the internal integrity that's
Sure.
here,
Mhm.
and to, in a sense, kind of the way that Peggy said, you know, so that we can keep on keeping on.
Yes.
Without starting to trip over our feet and offending one another, and, you know, perhaps becoming the community of all things.
You know, to me, there's just kind of a logical flow of things, and you just go where you need to go to get the job done.
But I mean, that has to be known.
Sure. And again, I think that's one of the good things about an interim, because I would imagine that Pastor Bohannon kind of knew about everything. And that generally speaking, people would go to him first for almost everything.
And he would refer them.
Yes, yeah. And, you know, as soon as I know, I'll refer people too. But if you can just go to folks directly, you don't have to waste your time on me. Yes, sir.
I find there's a deficiency here in what I thought we had some leadership
military or civil service or whatever. The fact that we're blundering along here with no specific guidance or recommendations from the top shed is a deficiency. The bishop now is at fault. Where's our leadership? We don't have to rise as an individual congregation. We can approve, we can accept. But why aren't we getting some input?
That sounds like a question for the bishop.
Well,
I think Dave addressed that.
well, let me,
Because I'm quite frankly not sure what you're asking, but go ahead.
so let me,
Council President, say something. Just
Mark.
so you know, and it may be my fault that I didn't communicate this as well as Dave did. The bishop has given us guidance. He came to our council meeting. He gave us Pastor Joe's name, highly recommended. And the fact that Joe is Presbyterian as opposed to Lutheran is because, and we checked on this, he is probably the most capable person to do an interim here in the Senate. There are other Lutheran pastors that do this, but they don't have all his qualifications, which is why the bishop recommended that we have Joe. He also laid out, as was mentioned, the path that we have to go. But we, luckily, unlike some other denominations, the churches being independent entities, congregations, they have to go to the path. Now, we'll get plenty of guidance, don't worry. And we'll get plenty of help. I've been talking to the bishop's office quite a bit here, actually, and actually getting help and getting guidance. So I think, and it's my fault if you don't all understand that we're well plugged in. But it's up to us to continue on this path.
So did the bishop give us, doesn't he have a list of 22,000 pastors out there that are looking for